I'm Rebecca Jones and this is the Bloomberg Australia podcast. This isn't the episode we plan to end 2025 with, and it's certainly not one we ever imagined having to make.
16 deceased persons is obviously a great tragedy for this state. Our thoughts, prayers and love go out to all of the families of the deceased.
My government will continue to stand with Jewish Australians and continue to stand to stamp out anti-Semitism in all of its forms.
Bondi Beach is one of those rare places that belongs equally to locals as it does to the world. For Sydney-siders, it's a place of ritual, from swims before work, hanging at the playground and on the grassy foreshore with mates, downing cocktails at icebergs, or, for my kids, star-spotting lifeguards from the TV show Bondi Rescue. Bondi's become a bit of a shorthand for Australia itself. Sunlit, multicultural, resilient. A strip of sand that carries both the easy joy of life by the beach and a deeper meaning that shows us how special shared public spaces can be. On this week's show, we're examining why the terror attack at Bondi on December 14th, Australia's worst ever, represents much more than a single violent event. We'll examine why the events of that evening feel like a cultural flashpoint and explore what it says about Australia's relationship with the wider world. To help do that, I'm joined by Bloomberg Opinion columnist David Fickling. David, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Rebecca.
I have lived in Sydney before and, not far from Bondi, so I know it well. You live in Sydney now, but you're originally from the UK. Tell me, how long did it take you after you first landed in Sydney to make that trek to Bondi Beach?
I first came to Sydney during the Olympics in 2000, and I don't remember precisely when it was, but I was here for about 3 weeks, and I definitely visited once then. And I would say now I'm actually a bit of a devotee. Back then, like a lot of people from the UK, I was not a good swimmer. And I'm probably still not a good swimmer, but I'm a competent and avid ocean swimmer there now. And most weekends, particularly in summer, but actually all through the year, you will find me at Bondi, actually in exactly the location that these tragic events took place. I recognise that area very closely. I change into my swimmers and my goggles exactly where that location took place. That concrete bridge that we've seen, I've crossed that, most weeks over the last 5 years, walking down to the beach. So I know that area very well, and it's a place that's important to me as it is to a lot of Australians, Jewish Australians, people around the world.
Yeah, Bondi Beach, it's one of those places that, as you say, it's instantly recognisable, isn't it? David, you've got a new column out for Bloomberg Opinion this week on the events of December 14th. Why does violence at Bondi and the events of Sunday night feel fundamentally different from similar events that we've seen happen elsewhere?
I think in what you described there about the special nature of Bondi, that's something that everyone is quite aware of around the world. It's one of those iconic images of Australia, like Uluru, like Sydney Harbour, like the Melbourne Cricket Ground. There's not many places like that are instantly recognisable in quite that way. So lots of people are quite aware of that. But I think something as well that outsiders maybe don't realise is that Bondi, more broadly, is a real heartland of Jewish Australia as well. Even back in the 1920s, about a third of the Jewish population of Sydney lived in Bondi and neighbouring suburbs. And a lot of the most notable Jewish Australians, Frank Lowy, the founder of the Westfield shopping centre chain, Harry Triguboff, notable apartment developer, they have roots in Bondi. Frank Lowy was longtime patron of a soccer club, the Hanukkah club in Bondi. They would get their hair cut in Bondi Junction by a nonagenarian klezmer singer. So there's a real culture there that people are maybe not aware of. Sea Folly, the Australian swimwear brand, was founded in 1975 by a Hungarian-born Holocaust survivor. So there's that part of the image. But then the other thing is, of course, what you mentioned in the first place. Australia, although religion is possibly at the heart of this attack, Australia is a very secular place. About 40% of the population is secular. But if there's a place in Australia that's a sort of sacred space for that sort of secular nation, it is the beach. If you look at Australian literature, very diverse writers, Tim Winton, John Pilger, Alexis Wright, David Malouf, Bridget Delaney, they all write about this sense of the beach as somewhere that is truly sacred to Australia, a place that's far more than just a place that you go to relax, but somewhere that's almost spiritual. I think one of the most famous photographic images of Australia, there's a 1937 photograph that any Australian and a lot of others will know. A man lying on a beach in Australia. I think there was a Bluey episode a few years ago where they referenced that particular photo. So yes, I think, 90% of this population, we live within 50 kilometres of the beach. Especially this time of year, it's the start of summer. Sydney, in particular, is a real beach city. It speaks to a lot of sides of this country.
When I think about the holiday season, it getting warmer, especially on Christmas Day, one of those iconic images that we see broadcast here on December 25th is that image of tourists and locals alike in their Santa hats down at Bondi Beach going for a swim. It really is deeply enmeshed in terms of our national identity. I want to talk a little bit about that with you, David. Australia has long seen itself as relatively insulated from global turmoil. Has this event punctured our self-image?
I think clearly it has in some ways. I'm a migrant, as we gather. I'm from the UK originally. That time when I first came to Australia, when I first went to Bondi Beach, I remember at that time and the subsequent times I've been here, there is a sense that you're distant from the world, even though we live in a very interconnected world. I remember living in the UK at the time of things like the Russian invasion of Georgia or some of the, pre-Ukraine war, some of the, aggression towards Ukraine. And I remember feeling that a lot of this stuff was very close to me, a sense of foreboding that this stuff was all around me. And that is, I think, certainly for me personally, but I think also for a lot of Australians, I think there is a sense that we are far from everywhere else. Having said that, I would push back a little bit from the idea that we're quite as isolated as we were. But back in the 30s, when some of these, the Jewish migrants came to Australia that made Bondi Beach such a centre of Jewish culture in Australia, we really were distant. You could only get here by boat. And, news travelled by telegraph, but pretty slowly. But that's changed. And that's actually been different for quite a long time. I mean, I mentioned the soccer club in Bondi, the Hanukkah club that Frank Lowy was a patron of. In 1982, there was a major bombing that was thought to be linked to Palestinian militants of that football club and also of the Israeli consulate. And the suspected sort of perpetrators of that went on to bomb a Pan Am flight from Tokyo to Los Angeles. So, we weren't insulated from that. The Bali bombings in 2002, a lot of people remember, 202 people were killed. 88 of those were Australians. And a lot of people talk about Bali as a sort of exclave of Australia. There's a lot of Australians there. I remember the last time after a terrorist attack being down at the beach, a lot of people from the next beach but one down from Bondi, Coogee, a lot of people from the local rugby club in Coogee were killed in the Bali bombings. And I remember going to Coogee Beach in very similar circumstances to what we're seeing now, people mourning what had happened. And then even like in 2019, we had the Christchurch mosque shootings, a white supremacist from near Sydney who was radicalised after reading writings from a Norwegian mass killer, shot 51 people dead. So we're not quite as isolated as we think. And I think, we've seen this huge surge of anti-Semitic attacks in the last couple of years in Australia. We're much more connected to things. So, if it's punctured that sense of us as somewhere that's insulated, I think that sense of us as an insulated place was in some ways like an act of will in the first place. We've never been as insulated as we thought we were. We've really tried to make ourselves insulated.
There has been significant international attention on this attack. Why do you think it's resonated beyond Australia? I
mean, I think one thing is just that it's incredibly human, the circumstances in which it happened. I was looking at an online flyer for the Hanukkah festival that was attacked. And you look at the events that were listed, a petting zoo, face painting, ice cream, hot chips, free donuts, kosher food, a menorah lighting. Like these things are all, it was a family event and very familiar family things. Any Jewish person worldwide would understand that feeling of Hanukkah as a happily family event. And I guess, in a lot of people's minds, there's a sort of fusion of the imagery of Hanukkah and Christmas as festivals in December involving candles and gifts and families. So I think we all have a deep understanding of that. And if anything, the more alienating thing for most people around the world is that here in Australia, we celebrate Hanukkah and Christmas in 30-degree heat on the beach, that's the unfamiliar feeling. On the deepest fundamental human level, there's that. But then, of course, we've not spoke much about yet, but we have to speak about there's a political element to this. We don't exactly know the motive yet. The police haven't stated that at this point, but it's not hard to speculate. We have an attack on a Hanukkah festival on the first day of Hanukkah. One of the alleged shooters is reported to have had links to extremists in Sydney who styled themselves as an Islamic State cell. And of course, as I said, there's been, since the Hamas attack on Israel in 2023 and Israel's war on Gaza, there's been global attention on political violence between Muslims and Jews. And this is an incredibly vivid and horrible instance of that. You know, to your point about isolation from global turmoil, there has been a huge rise in anti-Semitic incidents over the last few years, as many in the past 2 years as in the previous 10, according to a report a couple of weeks ago by the Executive Council of Australian Jewry. There have been firebombings of cars and homes, graffiti with threats, slurs, swastikas, windows smashed, countless verbal and physical abuse. And also, I would say, you know, there has been an increase in Islamophobic attacks as well. But a lot of these anti-Semitic attacks, they appear to have been deliberately orchestrated from outside. Just in August, Australia expelled Iran's ambassador and 3 other diplomats because they concluded that some of these attacks, in fact, one of them, a firebombing of a kosher restaurant very close to Bondi Beach, had been orchestrated by Iran's Revolutionary Guard. You put all this together, Australia's successfully sold an image of itself, both to the world and to itself, as this peaceful, beachy place, a refuge where the hatreds of the old world melt away, you know, take off our clothes and frolic in the waves. You would be shocked to see violence like you saw on Sunday anywhere, but I think there is something about the image of Australia to the world that makes it particularly shocking. You're particularly shocked to see it in a place which consciously styles itself as a place, you know, beyond some of these hatreds of the old world, and a place that, you know, certainly you go to the beach, there is no place where you feel more distant from politics and from violence.
I want to pick up a little bit on that, beyond the social impact of this terror attack, and look at it from an economic or political perspective, I suppose is most appropriate, given that it's only happened in the last couple of days. The economic impact of an incident like this does take some time to unravel and reveal itself. David, does this moment put a strain on Australia's political future? And in what ways should we expect to see this playing out in the days and weeks ahead?
I mean, a lot now depends on how politicians and public figures choose to respond to it. You know, Australia prides itself on its multiculturalism, and in general, we're probably not as successful as a lot of people think we are, but in a lot of ways we have been pretty successful. And I think it's in the hands of politicians and public figures to how to respond to this. Obviously, the alleged attackers on Sunday, again, we don't know their motives, but it looks pretty clear to me that they would want to put strain on multiculturalism. Why would you choose this target? Why would you choose these people? You want to provoke people into reaction, very much like the Christchurch killer and all terrorists since time immemorial. You want to carry out something political with your violence. And public figures in these situations have a choice. They can decide whether they want to give the terrorists what they want or to deny it. Clearly, there's a problem with extremism in Australia, specifically with anti-Semitism. You don't get 1,600 attacks in the past year without that being the case. But you're already hearing on social media and elsewhere people trying to link this killing to immigration and to Islam. And responsible politicians are going to push back on that. They're not going to indulge that. There's close to 1 million Muslims in Australia. They're exactly the same as the rest of us. This hero that a lot of people have seen on videos tackling one of the shooters, Ahmed is a Muslim. And go to any Australian beach on a hot day like Sunday, and you'll find Muslim families and Jewish families barbecuing, swimming, enjoying themselves like everyone else. So, if you want to tackle terrorism, you got to tackle terrorism. You infiltrate extremist networks, as the Australian government has been doing, maybe not successfully enough. I think clearly from what we've seen, not successfully enough in this case. If, as some of the reports have been saying recently, one of the killers had been investigated for extremist links, while the other one, his father, was allowed to hold a gun license. If that's the case, it's clearly a terrible failure that two people so closely linked, living in the same house, that this was not intervened in. But when people are mourning and scared, as they are at the moment, there's often an urge for vengeance, collective punishment, strong actions. If you're serious about multiculturalism, you attack terrorism. You don't have collective punishment. You don't, make it a broader issue.
Finally, David, the events of Sunday have been described by some as a cultural flashpoint. What are the risks and opportunities in how Australia responds from this point?
Well, I think it's very much as we said. It's a lot of people will want to frame this as a flashpoint in Australia as a multicultural nation. I am hopeful that the political backdrop in Australia is somewhat different to what we've seen in other parts of the world, in that in most parts of the world, there is a huge backlash against migration. There has certainly been a rise in anti-migration sentiment in Australia, but it's still, I think I saw a survey from a couple of months ago, I think only 13% of the population counted as a top 3 issue. So it's not a particularly salient issue. And one difference I think that we're seeing is that in a lot of the world, politicians are constantly worried about losing voters to their right and to stronger anti-migration sentiment across the political spectrum from the left to the right. If you look at Albanese's response to this so far, mainly he's talked about gun control. He's not touched that rail of anti-migration sentiment. Maybe that will come in the next few days. I sincerely hope not. I'm a migrant to Australia, and I like the multiculturalism of Australia, and I like the spirit of that. The Hanukkah festival on the beach, all people of all, creeds and backgrounds gathering together to just enjoy themselves. And that's actually, I think there is something important to that. It's not just escapism. I think there's something virtuous in that. And so I would like to see a little bit of spine in people in resisting that.
David Fickling, thank you for your insights. If you found today's conversation insightful, be sure to follow the Bloomberg Australia podcast wherever you listen and check for more reading on Australia's people and politics, including the latest from Bloomberg Opinion columnist David Fickling at bloomberg.com. This episode was recorded on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri and Gadigal people. It was produced by Paul Allen and edited by Chris Burke and Ainsley Chandler. I'm Rebecca Jones. Thanks for listening.